Mom and Dad needed to worry about us. Why? Our relatives, neighbors, and friends were everywhere. On one side were the Burbakers. Frank was the town tailor. He had two sisters, Aunt Bet and Aunt Lute. Also living at the Burbakers were the Polly, the parrot. The parrot could imitate Mom to a T. When we heard Mom calling, "Helen, Charles, Tom," we came home running to find it was only the parrot calling. Phil English and his brother Bruce, who lived down by the high school and the baseball diamond, owned another parrot, only he was a bad parrot. Every other word was a cuss word. We don't know if he learned it from the English brothers or from living so close to the baseball diamond. On the other side of our house were the Reynolds, who owned and ran the grocery store, and next to that they owned a hotel. Louise ran the grocery store. Her brother, I think his name was Philip, ran the hotel, and the brother Gus ran the drugstore downtown. Both the Brubakers and the Reiners were like family to us. On 2nd Street nearby were Grandma and Granddad Little and Aunt Mary, our father's sister, and this was the most favorite place to visit. Grandma always had something for us, like raisin-tailed cookies. On many Sundays, Aunt Mary and her boyfriend, Chuck Hedrock, would take us for a ride in the Ford Granddad bought for her. Charles and I rode in the rumble seat. Chuck called himself the little stool pusher, which is what the people called a foreman. We, Charles and Helen and I, always felt we were so blessed to have all four of our grandparents. Grandma and Grandpa Sutton lived on nearby Sistersville, West Virginia, just 5 miles away. We would visit them often, and we would see Uncle Jack, Aunt Geneva, and their two children, Jackie and Jimmy, quite often. When we had Sunday's dinner, in addition to Grandma and Grandpa, Mom, Dad, and Helen and Charles, and Tom, there would be Aunt Irene, her daughter Lily, Uncle Jack, Uncle Bob, and others. George, Lily's cat, would hide out somewhere when he heard us coming, usually on top of the roof, and he would return as soon as we left. Each time we visited Grandma and Grandpa Sutton, we'd also walk to Aunt Nora and Uncle Clarence's house. They lived on top of the hill, and we had to climb a great many stairs to get to their home. Uncle Clarence was Granddad Little's brother and a physician. Granddad Little's other brother was Frank Little, was a dentist who fixed our teeth at a discount. Uncle Clarence had two daughters, Betty and Jessie, who were also there. Uncle Clarence had an office in his house and had a picture of Will Rogers hanging over the desk. Because he greatly admired him, we always had a good time. As usual, after visiting our grandparents, we would head up the hill to see our Uncle Clarence and Aunt Nora. They were always the same, always glad to see us. Charles and I always felt at home. Just about everyone I knew in New Matamoras had a nickname. Uncle John Behrens gave us ours. I was Bohunkus and Charles was Josephus, Bo and Joe. Back to our town, New Matamoras. Going up 2nd Street, we saw people like the Macadances, the Ways, and the Carson and others. Uncle Ed and Aunt Toon Carson was a great place for us to hang out. They were the parents of our Aunt Burl, who married Mom's older brother, Wayne. Ed Carson was related to Kit Carson. On their mantel was an old 6-shooter and a large hunting knife. Charles and I took them down off the mantel so that we could play Kit Carson. About a block away on Front Street was the Presbyterian Church. This was a church that Mom attended, and when Charles and I were old enough, it became our church. When Charles and I were being baptized, and the minister was baptizing us, Charles and Thomas, one of us said, "No Charles and no Thomas, we are Bohunkus and Josephus." The Presbyterian Church was on Front Street and extended to 2nd Street. Going back down to 2nd Street towards Grandview, we would walk past Granddad and Grandma Little's, across Main Street and past Jack Young's store, and then walk another block to Lucille's and LeGros, who were our godparents. Living with them was Lucille's sister, Olive, and their dad, Pop Walters. Pop built us a doghouse for our dog, Buddy. The house was built from logs and had a tin roof made from tin cans, and it was painted black. It looked like a log cabin and was very special. Right after Pop built the doghouse, Buddy got loose on a rainy, cold day. We found him near the city dump, poisoned. I think Mr. Foster, who lived by the dump, killed him. He didn't like dogs, but he didn't like rats either. Maybe Buddy ate the rat poison. About half-mile further down the 2nd Street lived two of Grandma's sisters, Aunt Ella and Aunt Lyde. Aunt Ella was a widower, getting up in years, and Aunt Lyde never married. She was also quite old. We spent many hours visiting our aunts. They were strong Christians and went to the Methodist Church, as did many of Grandma Little's other sisters. And both Mary, her daughter, and later her granddaughter Helen also went to the Methodist Church. This reminds me about the stained glass windows. In the early 1920s, Granddad Little donated 2 windows, one in the memory of his mother and father, Anna B. Wilson Little and Houston B. Little, and to his mother-in-law and father-in-law, Rebecca Behrens Little and Christian W. Behrens. Charles and I cussed a lot for a while, and that was because some mean men in our town encouraged us to swear, even gave us money to do it. They'd heat up pennies and threw them down in the street, and we'd pick them up and burn our fingers and swear. They would laugh. There was another day when Charles and I were walking across the field in Grandview with Dad and a high school teacher named Roy Heddleson. At the far end of the field was a pawpaw tree. Our aim was to get some of them pawpaws. The field was full of cow manure. As we walked in our bare feet, Charles and I stepped in this cow manure. Each time we stepped in this stuff, we cussed. I guess we could say that we cussed for the best. I never forgot Mr. Hellison's simply said, "Boys, instead of using those cuss words, just say, Husky Wawa." From that moment on, Charles and I did not cuss, so when Aunt Ella talked about us as others did, she could honestly say, the twins are good boys, and they're honest as the day is long, and I like that. But with our relatives and friends in our town, you'd think we would never get into trouble. On Sunday morning, Charles and I decided to go to Sistersville to the marble factory. The marble factory made the kind of marbles you play with, so I know how wrong we were, but we swam across the Ohio River to friendly West Virginia and then walked 5 miles up the railroad tracks to Sistersville and the marble factory. We helped ourselves to the marbles from the barrels near the factory. We filled our pockets, never thinking of it as stealing. Then we walked back down to friendly West Virginia, swam back across the river to New Matamoras, our town. The family is waiting for us. Our bottoms are sore for a week, and we never saw Dad so upset. That same summer, Charles and I were swimming along the shores of the Laurel Beach. We saw, walking up the beach, 2 teenagers with no clothes on. If we had not known the difference between boys and girls, we knew then. One cold February, George Washington's birthday, we had no school. Charles and I decided to build a raft and go out in the river to catch some waves from the boats going up the river. It was not much of a raft, 3 logs tied together with a rope. When we got out in the river, the raft just broke up, and we both fell in the river, and we were soaked. We built a fire to dry off, but we didn't do a good job.